have walked away, leaving karma to do the work. Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your stories. The slap landed hard, a sharp crack splitting the air. My head snapped sideways, a burning sting searing across my cheek. For a second, the world held its breath. Only the ticking of the kitchen clock filled the suffocating silence. I lifted a trembling hand to my face, fingertips brushing over the throbbing heat blooming against my skin. But the real pain wasn't physical. It was the hollow, gaping realization that the man I had once loved had crossed a line he could never un. Mark stood there, his hands still half raised, his chest rising and falling like a caged animal. His blue eyes I used to find comforting, were now dark, unreadable. Something flickered across his face, some twisted mix of anger, frustration, and maybe, for just a split second, regret, but it was gone just as quickly. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. Because this wasn't about the slap. This was about everything that had led up to this moment. The months, the years of feeling like a shadow in my own home. The slow, creeping realization that no matter what I did, I would always come second to his family. That Mark's loyalty was never mine to have, not fully, and tonight, standing in our kitchen with the scent of burnt onions curling in the air, he had finally proven it. It started with a conversation over dinner. Mark had cleared his throat, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand like he always did when he was about to say something I wouldn't like. "Emma needs a place to stay," he said casually, stabbing at a steak. I barely looked up from my plate. "She can use the guest room," I said, automatically cutting into my food, but Mark didn't respond. I glanced up and his stare sent a shiver down my spine. "No, Chloe," he said, voice firm. "She needs the house." I blinked, convinced I had misheard. "Our house?" "My house," Mark corrected, leaning back in his chair, one arm draped lazily over the backrest. "Emma just graduated law school. She has a future ahead of her. She needs a place to settle, to get started. It only makes sense." The fork slipped from my fingers, clattering against my plate. "You're joking," I said, half laughing, waiting for him to smirk and say he was messing with me. He didn't. Instead, he took another bite of his steak like we were discussing what movie to watch, like he wasn't asking me to just hand over the home I'd spent years making my own. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "Mark, this is my house. I inherited it from my grandmother. You know that." And just like that, the temperature in the room dropped. Mark exhaled sharply through his nose, like I had personally offended him. He set his fork down a little too hard, making the silverware rattle. "Chloe," he said, slow and condescending, like he was talking to a child. "You don't need this place. You're home all day doing what? Sitting around?" Emma actually has a career ahead of her. This house would finally be useful in her hands. Something inside me snapped. I pushed my chair back, the legs screeching against the hardwood. My chest felt tight, my pulse hammering in my ears. I had spent years pouring my heart into this house. Every room held pieces of me. Walls I had painted, furniture I had refinished, a garden I had nurtured from the dirt up. And now Mark was sitting there acting like none of it mattered, like I didn't matter. I let out a slow breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. "I am not giving up my home, Mark." His jaw tightened. "You're being selfish," he spat. "Emma needs us more than you do." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Emma needs a house. Tell her to buy one." Mark's hands curled into fists on the table. "Damn it, Chloe, why do you always have to make things so difficult?" My blood ran cold. I always make things difficult, like when I suggested we split finances after we got married, but he insisted on handling everything, like when I protested his mother dropping by unannounced every weekend to judge my cooking. Like when I argued against covering for Emma's reckless spending or her DUI or the countless times she had expected me to clean up her messes. Difficult. That's what he called it when I refused to be walked all over. I took a step back, my pulse racing. "You're serious about this," I murmured. "You actually think I should just give Emma the house?" Mark exhaled through his nose, rubbing a hand over his face like I was the one being unreasonable. "Chloe, just let it go, like I was supposed to roll over, like my life didn't matter." I shook my head. No, the word felt foreign in my mouth, small but powerful, and that's when it happened. Mark moved fast. Too fast for me to react. His hand lashed out, striking my face with a force that sent me stumbling backward. My hip slammed into the edge of the table, knocking over my glass of wine, the deep red spilling across the white linen tablecloth like blood. A gasp clawed its way up my throat, but I swallowed it down. Mark looked just as shocked as I felt. His hand hovered in the air, like he couldn't believe what he'd just done. But I believed it, because this wasn't a mistake. This was the moment everything became clear. I straightened slowly, my fingers still pressed against my cheek. Mark took a step forward, but I flinched, and he stopped dead in his tracks. "Chloe," he started, his voice lower now, almost apologetic. I turned on my heel and walked away. I didn't run. I didn't scream, I just walked, because the second his hand met my face, he had lost me. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom. No, my bedroom. The room that, until now, I had foolishly thought of as ours. Shutting the door behind me, I locked it. My pulse still roared in my ears, but my mind was eerily quiet. There was no questioning, no debating. I knew what I had to do. I crossed the room and opened the closet, reaching for the small suitcase buried beneath years of clutter. My hands were steady as I pulled it out, setting it on the bed. This wasn't a panic move. This wasn't a temporary break. This was the moment I chose myself. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the suitcase in front of me. My hands, still warm from the slap, rested against the cool fabric. The room around me felt like a cage, one I had spent years decorating, organizing, making comfortable. But none of it was real. None of it belonged to me. Not the matching nightstands, not the neatly folded blankets, not the framed wedding photo still clinging to the wall, mocking me. Not even myself. For years, I had convinced myself that the sacrifices I made for this marriage were normal, that Mark's dismissiveness, his subtle manipulations, his cold expectation that I would always just comply, that was love. I had lied to myself so well that I had started to believe it, but now my skin still burned from the impact of his hand, and that lie crumbled into dust. Mark had spent years chipping away at me, breaking me down into something small, something manageable. He had assumed that by the time he asked me to give up my house, my grandmother's house, I would already be too weak to fight back. He was wrong. I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't scream, I would leave, and I would take back everything he thought he had taken from me. I opened the nightstand drawer and pulled out my birth certificate, my passport, and my grandmother's will. The document that made it crystal clear, this house was never Mark's to give away. It belonged to me. Had he really believed I would just hand it over, that I would stand aside while his sister moved in, erasing every trace of me? I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening on the papers. I reached into the closet next, pulling down a box from the top shelf, the one I had kept hidden behind years of old sweaters and forgotten holiday decorations. Inside was a file folder, thick with documents I had gathered over time, bank statements, house deed, the prenuptial agreement Mark had insisted we didn't need but had signed anyway, smug and overconfident. If he had read it carefully, he would have known that in the event of a divorce, he was entitled to nothing. He hadn't, I smiled, a cold, unfamiliar thing, as I tucked the file into my bag. Mark thought I was powerless, that I would never leave, never question him. That mistake was going to cost him everything. I grabbed my phone, my fingers moving on autopilot as I opened my banking app. Our accounts were joint, Mark had insisted on that. Too easier to manage finances, he had said. What he really meant was easier to control me. But I had my own account, a separate one I had opened years ago, depositing whatever I could from my freelance work. At first, I had done it out of habit. My mother had always told me a woman should always have an escape plan, even if she never uses it. Now, that escape plan was saving my life. I transferred a substantial portion of our joint savings into my personal account. Not enough to raise suspicion yet, but enough to make sure I landed on my feet. Then, with a deep breath, I transferred everything from my personal account to a brand new one Mark didn't know existed. One last step. I set up an alert. The second Mark accessed our bank account, I would get a notification. I needed to stay ahead of him. I needed time. Mark couldn't know I was leaving, not yet. I walked to the bathroom, flipping on the light. My reflection in the mirror stopped me cold. A red mark stretched across my cheek, the outline of his hand still visible against my skin. My eyes, once so full of something, looked back at me, dull and tired. This was the last time I would see myself like this. I turned on the faucet, splashing cold water on my face, letting the shock of it clear my mind. Then I fixed my hair, smoothed my expression, and practiced my smile. I had to be careful. Mark had always been good at sensing when something was off. Tomorrow I would wake up, cook breakfast, kiss his cheek, and pretend nothing had changed. I would let him think he had won. And in the meantime, I would finish preparing for the moment when I would walk out of this house and never look back. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to Mark's steady breathing beside me, my body rigid, my mind racing. When his alarm went off at 6 a.m., I pretended to stir awake, yawning as he sat up. He glanced at me, his eyes scanning my face. For a moment, something flickered there. Hesitation, maybe? He knew. Maybe not consciously, but something inside him had registered the shift in me. But instead of apologizing, instead of acknowledging what he had done, he did what he always did. He ignored it. "You're up early," he said, his voice scratchy with sleep. I forced a small smile, stretching like I had no care in the world. "Just couldn't sleep, thinking about everything." He exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. "You'll see, Chloe. This is what's best for everyone. Emma deserves this." Emma deserves this. I swallowed back my anger. Maybe you're right. Mark smiled, clearly pleased with himself. God, he was so sure he had won. He kissed my forehead and left for work. I waited exactly 12 minutes after he pulled out of the driveway before I reached for my phone. The realtor picked up on the second ring. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I want to proceed with the sale. I'll be ready to sign by the end of the week." If I played my cards right, Mark would never even see it coming. The days passed in a blur. I played the role of the obedient wife perfectly. I cooked dinner, nodded in all the right places when Mark talked about Emma's big future in my house. All the while, I packed my things in secret. A few books here, a pair of shoes there, small enough that he wouldn't notice. By the time the sale was finalized, I was ready. The night before I left, I wrote Mark a letter. It was short, blunt. "Mark, you made one mistake. You thought I was weak. You thought I'd let you take everything from me. But this house was never yours to give. And now it's no longer mine either. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Find somewhere else to live, Chloe." I placed it on the counter right where he'd see it first thing in the morning. Then I grabbed my bag, stepped out into the cold night air, and left my old life behind. The moment I drove away, I checked my bank notifications. Mark had just logged in. I could picture him now, confused, then furious, then terrified, because for the first time in our marriage, I was the one in control. And for the first time in years, I was free. Mark was going to lose his damn mind. I imagined it as I drove away, the city lights stretching ahead of me like a runway to freedom. The second he walked into that kitchen, still groggy from sleep, still believing he had won, he'd see my letter. And then rage, confusion, maybe even a hint of fear, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. I could picture the exact moment he'd check his phone, scrolling through our bank account, expecting to see everything in order, only to realize that half of it was gone. By now, the house sale had finalized, the paperwork was legally binding, there was nothing he could do. And yet, I knew he'd try. I could see him storming into his lawyer's office, spitting demands, insisting, "This isn't fair," because men like Mark never think consequences apply to them. And when the lawyer calmly explained that yes, actually it is fair, Mark would have no choice but to go through with his backup plan. Emma. Emma pulled into the driveway of what she thought was her new home, the one her dear, devoted brother had secured for her. I wasn't there to see it, but I could imagine her stepping out of her car, heels clicking against the pavement, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, completely oblivious. The neighborhood was exactly the kind of place she wanted to be seen in. Charming, tree-lined streets, well-manicured lawns, homes with just enough character to look expensive without being old. She had always hated that I lived here. "God, Chloe," she had scoffed once, glancing around the living room. "This place is so vintage." She had said it like an insult, like the home I had inherited, the home I had poured my heart into, was nothing more than an aesthetic inconvenience. Now, she thought it was hers. She probably walked up to the door with a satisfied smirk, swinging it open like she already owned the place. And for a few minutes, I'm sure everything seemed perfect. The house was still clean, still organized. The walls still held the memories of what once was, but something was missing. Me. And then she found the letter. It was probably sitting exactly where I had left it, leaning against the coffee maker, where Mark would have seen it first thing that morning. Maybe she didn't notice it right away. Maybe she set down her purse, took a leisurely stroll through her new kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, but eventually her eyes must have landed on that envelope, and then the realization set in. I could imagine her picking it up, nails tapping against the paper as she unfolded it. Maybe she expected some sweet little note, a pathetic goodbye, an apology for daring to take up space in what was rightfully hers. Instead, she got this. Emma, this house was never Mark's to give, and now it's not mine either. It was sold. The new owners move in tomorrow, enjoy finding another place to live. Chloe. I like to think she read it twice. That her perfectly painted lips parted in stunned disbelief, that her stomach twisted as the words sank in. And then, Mark? I don't know exactly what happened next, but I can guess. Mark probably came storming in minutes later, still reeling from his own realization, his anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Emma would have shoved the letter in his face, demanding an explanation, and Mark, oh Mark, would have scrambled for excuses, would have tried to convince her that it was some mistake, that I was lying, that this wasn't real. Until the doorbell rang, until the new owners showed up, contract in hand, ready to move in. Because that was real, and nothing Mark could say or do was going to change that. I wonder when it hit her, when she realized that Mark wasn't just some generous brother sacrificing for his little sister, that he had expected me to sacrifice for her instead. Did she feel guilty? Did she replay every time she had called me lazy, selfish, ungrateful? Did she remember the way she used to roll her eyes whenever I stood up for myself? Or did she only feel betrayed that Mark had let it come to this? I'll never know, but I do know what happened next. The movers arrived, the house was emptied, and Emma, spoiled, entitled, used to getting everything she wanted, was left standing in a driveway that no longer belonged to her. Mark never called me. Not directly, but I got the notifications he tried, logging into our bank account over and over again, probably refreshing the page in disbelief, watching as every dime he thought he controlled slipped through his fingers. I imagine him pacing back and forth, jaw clenched, hands curled into fists, because what could he do? Sue me? For what? I hadn't stolen from him. I had taken what was mine. I had sold what was mine. He had nothing, and for the first time in his life, he was powerless. I don't know where he went after that. Did he crash on a friend's couch? Did he beg his parents for help? Did he lash out at Emma when she refused to take him in? It didn't matter. I was gone, and there was no coming back from this. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a number I almost didn't recognize. Emma? I let it go to voicemail. I had expected anger, screaming, some final attempt to guilt trip me into fixing the mess they had created. But when I played the message, her voice was small. Chloe, she started, and for the first time, she didn't sound like a girl who had the whole world handed to her. I didn't know. Silence stretched for a few seconds before she spoke again. I mean, I should have known. I should have, God, I don't know, but I didn't. A shaky breath. I'm sorry. She hung up, no plea for help, no demand for me to fix things. Just an apology that had come way too late. I deleted the message. Because it didn't matter anymore. Emma had spent years watching Mark push me around. She had laughed when he dismissed me, rolled her eyes when I tried to stand up for myself. She had let it happen. And now? Now she had learned what it felt like to be discarded. But I wasn't about to be the one to save her. By the time Mark and Emma had fully processed what had happened, I was already gone. I had a new place, a new life waiting for me. And I didn't spare them a second thought because they had spent years making sure I knew I wasn't a priority. Now, finally, they understood what that felt like. Freedom smelled like cheap coffee and fresh asphalt. I sat in a small diner off the highway, staring at a laminated menu I wasn't really reading, the scent of burnt toast clinging to the air. Outside, the morning rush had started, cars streaming past, people hurrying off to lives that had nothing to do with me. I was just another nameless woman in a booth, sipping coffee too bitter to enjoy, and for the first time in years, no one knew where I was. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. Mark wasn't calling, Emma wasn't texting, no one was demanding anything from me. The silence was deafening. I had spent so long fighting, calculating, planning my escape that now, sitting here, actually free, I didn't know what to do with myself. Who was I if I wasn't Mark's wife? If I wasn't the woman keeping everything together while he tore it all apart? For the past decade, my life had been built around surviving him. Now I had to figure out how to live. The place I found wasn't much. A tiny one-bedroom on the third floor of a building that smelled like a mix of cigarettes and lemon-scented cleaner. The walls were thin, and I could hear my neighbor's TV blaring through the drywall, some crime show rerun echoing in the background. But it was mine. No one else's name was on the lease. No one could walk in and demand that I leave. No one could tell me what I could or couldn't do. I could paint the walls bright yellow if I wanted. I could fill the kitchen with mismatched mugs. I could leave my laundry in the dryer for 3 days without hearing a passive-aggressive comment about being lazy. It was small, it was simple, but it was safe. That first night, I sat on the floor, eating takeout straight from the container, my boxes still stacked around me. I should have been exhausted. I should have felt relief. Instead, my chest felt tight. Because after everything, I still didn't feel like I belonged to myself. For days, I moved like a ghost through my own life. I did what I was supposed to do, set up my new bank account, changed my phone number, started looking for work. I kept myself busy. But the past wasn't done with me yet. It followed me everywhere. At the grocery store, I reached for the cereal Mark used to eat, only to stop, fingers hovering over the box. At night, I still curled up on the right side of the bed, leaving space for a man who wasn't there. And worst of all, I still heard his voice. Every time I tried to do something for myself, some cruel whisper of him echoed in my head. Why would you even bother? You're not good at that. That's a waste of money. Just let me handle it. You wouldn't last a week without me. He had planted those words deep inside me, watering them with every dismissal, every insult dressed up as a joke. I had left him. I had taken my money, my home, my life back. But he was still there, and I didn't know how to get rid of him. I don't know why I walked inside. It was one of those accidental moments, the kind that doesn't feel important at first, but ends up changing everything. I had been wandering, trying to clear my head, when I saw the sign in the window. I wasn't in the business of helping anyone. Hell, I could barely help myself, but something about those words made me push open the door. The woman at the front desk looked up with a warm smile. First time here? I hesitated. Yeah, I almost turned around, but for some reason I didn't. I just wanted to see what this place is. She nodded like she understood more than I was saying. We offer a lot: career resources, support groups, housing assistance for women leaving bad situations. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I didn't realize I had been holding my breath until I let it out in a shaky exhale. This wasn't just a place, it was my place. I wasn't the only woman who had walked away from someone who tried to break her. I wasn't alone in trying to figure out what came next. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I started showing up every day. At first, I just sat in on meetings, listening. I heard stories that weren't so different from mine. Women who had given everything to men who left them shattered. Women who had been told they were too much or not enough or nothing at all. And then one day, I started talking. At first, it was just a sentence or two, a vague, hesitant admission that I had left someone too. Then it was the whole story. By the time I finished, I wasn't just talking to them, I was talking to me. Saying it out loud, telling the truth, not the watered-down version I had rehearsed for years. It was like finally breaking through the surface after being underwater for too long. Mark had convinced me I was powerless, but sitting in that room, surrounded by women who had lost and rebuilt and survived, I finally understood something. I was never powerless. I had just been made to believe I was. And that belief, it was a lie. One evening, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, I recognized the voice immediately. Mark. Chloe, he said, and he sounded broken. I don't know where you are. I don't know if you'll even hear this, but Jesus, Chloe, I messed up. A pause. I thought you'd come back. I thought... He let out a breath. Don't know what I thought. Another pause, longer this time. Then, quietly, are you happy? I stared at my phone. I could have deleted the message. I could have called him back, told him everything I wanted to say, screamed at him for years of pain. But instead I smiled, not the cold, bitter smile I had worn in my old life, a real one, because for the first time in forever, I knew the answer to his question. Yes, Mark, I am. And then I deleted the message, because I had nothing left to say. Mark's voice still echoed in my head long after I deleted the voicemail. Are you happy? He had sounded so small, so lost. A part of me, the old me, might have felt sorry for him, might have even considered calling him back, giving him the closure he was looking for. But I didn't. Because Mark wasn't really asking if I was happy. He was asking if I regretted leaving, if I missed him, if there was even the tiniest chance I would look back. And the answer to all of those questions was no. I had spent years twisting myself into someone Mark could love, someone Mark could tolerate. I had made myself smaller, quieter, more agreeable. And for what? So he could throw me away the second his sister needed a place to live? So he could slap me across the face when I dared to say no? Mark had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. I don't know exactly how things unraveled for him after I left, but I heard bits and pieces. I heard he tried to fight the house sale, stormed into his lawyer's office, demanded they fix it, only to be told there was nothing they could do. The house had been mine, legally and unequivocally, and I had every right to sell it. I heard he burned through what was left of his savings fast. He had never been good with money, had always relied on me to be the one keeping things afloat. Without me, the cracks in his life spread like wildfire. And Emma hadn't been able to save him. She had called me once, that one, pathetic voicemail. I didn't know, she had said. I'm sorry. I hadn't responded, because Emma hadn't cared to know. For years, she had benefited from my silence. She had let Mark belittle me, had laughed when he dismissed me, had watched as he made me feel like I was nothing, and she had said nothing. Until it affected her, until she was the one left standing in a driveway with nowhere to go. I heard through the grapevine that she tried to stick it out with Mark for a while. Maybe she felt guilty, maybe she thought she could help him get back on his feet. But guilt only stretches so far, and Emma had never been the type to stay anywhere that didn't benefit her. So when things got bad, when the money ran out, when the reality of their situation set in, she left, just like Mark had expected me to. I don't know where Mark ended up. At first, he stayed with friends, bouncing from couch to couch. But Mark wasn't someone people wanted around for long. He was bitter, angry, still convinced that I was the villain in all of this. And bitterness is exhausting. People get tired of hearing the same old sob story. They move on, and eventually Mark had no one left to turn to. Maybe he found a way to scrape by. Maybe he didn't. I didn't care, because Mark had never cared when I was struggling. When I felt trapped, when I felt like I had no way out, he had never once stopped to ask if I was happy. And now, when the tables had turned, I wasn't about to ask him either. It took a while before I could think about Mark and Emma without feeling anything, anger, resentment, even sadness. But one day, I realized I hadn't thought about them at all. I had been too busy living, too busy waking up in a bed that was mine, walking into a kitchen that belonged to me, making coffee without the weight of someone else's expectations on my shoulders, too busy building a life that had nothing to do with them. And that was when I knew I had truly moved on. I learned a lot from my time with Mark. I learned that love isn't about control. It isn't about sacrifice, about how much you're willing to endure. It's about respect. And if someone doesn't respect you, they don't deserve anything from you. Not your time, not your love, not even your hatred. Mark had already taken so much from me. I wasn't going to let him take one more second of my life. So I let him go completely. I don't check up on him. I don't wonder where he is, because wherever he is, whatever he's doing, that's not my problem anymore. Have you ever walked away from someone who didn't deserve you?